This month, we are talking about the book of Daniel. This congregation for several years has taken the month of February and devoted to a specific book or study within the Bible. And the preachers, Ricky, myself, and now Noah, take some time and we do some writings to help us think and reflect and work through a text of Scripture. And so this year, we're talking about the book of Daniel. And it certainly is very applicable to our times and our situations that we are in. Let me ask you a question. What toy did you play growing up with? What was the toy that you gravitated towards? Do you remember it? Have you been down the toy aisle in a major store lately? It's amazing, isn't it? Aisles and aisles of toys. And the toys have evolved in a lot of different ways. Did I do that? I did that. Okay, sorry. They've evolved in a lot of different ways. I mean, I remember the old days when you had the cap guns and, you shot it and it had that smell of smoke, but, it was so cool. You were like a cowboy in the Old West. And today they have Nerf guns that make it look like assault weapons and sniper rifles. They have Legos that are thousands of pieces and you can build an entire city made out of brick. There's costumes and accessories so that every girl can be whatever princess or heroine she wants to be. I mean, the toys are amazing when you look at what they've done today with their innovation and creativity. But there's still some toys that almost 60 years later still continue to pop on the shelves, like maybe this one. Did y'all ever play with him? I didn't know it, but when he first came out, when Mr. Potato Head first was invented, all they made was the pieces, the little plastic pieces. And it was designed that you would take those pieces and you would pin them on an actual potato. I'll leave that there. And then in 1964, they came out with an actual plastic potato and all the accessories that you could put them in. Now think for a minute. When he first came out and he hit the shelves, there were some ways he was immediately inferior to his competitors. He does not have the beauty or the form or the figure of a Barbie. He's not nearly as pretty because he's a potato. He's a spud. He doesn't have the rippling biceps of a G.I. Joe and all the cool guns and scars. But there was something very unique about Mr. Potato Head. And that was he could do something that none of the other ones could really do in the way that he was, and that was that you could change him. In a moment, you could change him. His eyes, his nose, his lips, his hands, his hair, all the accessories that you could make him completely different in a moment. And it's not just that you could change out his nose or change out his lips. You could put pieces wherever you wanted. You could put ears on the eyes and the nose on the head. You could put them anywhere. And then as he became more and more popular and the pieces came out, Mr. Potato Head in an instant could be changed to Mrs. Potato Head just by changing the way he looked. Now, if there were a toy that represented our culture today, would it not be Mr. Potato Head? Think for a minute, think. You don't like who you are. You don't like the way you look. You don't like the things that you are believing. You don't like the direction of your life, and so change. Change your look. Change your appearance. Change your beliefs, change your identity to be whatever it is, whoever it is you want to be. In many ways, we are facing a consistent, continual conflict with our culture. Culture wants us to be able to change, to fit in to the mode of what is up, what is right, what is hip, what is hot today. And the consistent, continual conflict is that as we continue to strive to stand on what God has taught as truth and continue to be who God has called us to be, we remain in conflict with a culture that says, no, you need to change who you are in order to fit with us. That is the context of the book of Daniel. The Babylonians have come and destroyed the nation of Judah and took a number of God's people as captives into this foreign land. And the book of Daniel focuses primarily on 4 young Jewish men who face that conflict. Here's the conflict. How do we remain faithful to God and loyal to God's laws when we find ourselves in the midst of a godless, wicked, pagan culture? Or as one author put it this way, how can we remain anchored in our Christian faith when the whitewater rapids of cultural change threaten to carry us away? Isn't that the question? That's the question for the book of Daniel. But in many ways, can't you just ask that same question and put it to 2021? Can you see then that what we're going to be studying in the book of Daniel, though it's ancient, was far removed from our times by thousands of years. The things that they were facing, the message that this is teaching us is just as applicable to what we're going through today. And so what I want to start with today is notice how the culture of Babylon sought to change these young Jewish men. We're starting in Daniel chapter 1. How did they try to change these Jewish men? I have three ways from the first chapter of the book of Daniel. Culture tried to change God's people then, and they try to do it today. Here's number one, by renaming them. We're beginning in verse 1 of Daniel chapter 1. It says, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. The Lord gave Jehoiakim, the king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the vessels of the house of God. And he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and he brought the vessels into the treasury of his God. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, the chief of his officials, to bring in some of the sons of Israel, including some of the royal family of the nobles. Youths, in verse 4, in whom was no defect, who were good-looking, showing intelligence in every branch of wisdom, endowed with understanding and discerning knowledge, and who had ability for serving in the king's court. He ordered him to teach them the literature and the language of the Chaldeans. The king appointed for them a daily ration from the king's choice food and from the wine which he drank, and appointed that they should be educated 3 years, at the end of which they were to enter the king's personal service. Now among them from the sons of Judah were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Then the commander of the officials assigned new names to them. And to Daniel he assigned the name Belteshazzar, to Hananiah Shadrach, to Mishael Meshach, and to Azariah Abednego. You get the idea here. Here comes the Babylonians. They're taking the captives, and among the captives, they're taking the best, the brightest, the most handsome, those who are going to look good towards outsiders. They are going to represent the face of the nation to the world. And as we read in the text, the process is what we might call assimilation. We're going to make you like us. That is, we're going to teach you the ways, the culture, the language of the Babylonians, a process that took 3 years. But that assimilation all began in verse 7. The first step of making them like us is taking away their names. And it's not just that we're going to give you Babylonian names so that you'll fit in among us. They were completely stripping and removing the past, their Jewish heritage, by giving them these new names. And so Daniel, the name Daniel, notice if you will for a moment, the EL on the name of Daniel connects us to the name of God, Elohim. Ricky did a wonderful job last year teaching a class on the names of God. Elohim is the name of our God, one of his names. Points us to, as Ricky pointed out, not just the creative power of God, but really the sovereignty of God, who makes all things. And so you'll find several Jewish men's names that connect them to this name of God, like Ezekiel or Joel. It connects us to the name of God. Well, Daniel's name means God is my judge. His new name is Belteshazzar, which means Bel, protect the king. Now look at that. His Hebrew name, his Jewish name, connects him to his God. His Babylonian name connects him to a different God, a different king. It's a different Daniel. Bel, false god worshipped by the Babylonians. Protect the king, not the king of Judah, the king of Babylon, to protect Nebuchadnezzar. Bel, protect the king. The shift of identity. The name Hananiah, again, much like Daniel, the ending prefix of Hananiah connects us to the name of God, Yahweh, I-A-H. Again, a lot of those Jewish men's names, Nehemiah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Obadiah, Zephaniah, Zechariah, the I-A-H connects you to the name Yahweh, the living God, the I am eternal God, our personal God. And so Hananiah means Yahweh has been gracious, but he has given the new name Shadrach, which means I am, notice, afraid of God. Isn't it interesting? I'm afraid of God. How directly in conflict with what God taught through his people, through his words, like Psalm 46, 1 and 2. The Lord is my refuge and my strength. I shall not be afraid. This present help in times of trouble. Well, now I am afraid of God. God is no longer good. The name Mishael means who can compare to my God? He has given the new name Meshach, which means I am despised and humiliated. Think of the contrast there. Who can compare to my God, showing the greatness of God? And it's almost like this new name is saying, where's your God now? Where's your God? Why didn't he save you when we came to besiege you? Why didn't he protect you when our armies came to your city? You are despised because of your God. You are laid low because of your God. And then there is Azariah, meaning Yahweh has helped, and Abednego means servant of Nebo. Nebo, the false god, another false god that they worshipped. You see what they're doing here? It's not merely that they're changing the men's names, these boys' names. They're changing their identity, who they are. You see, one's identity is a reflection of our values, of our beliefs, and of our convictions. Think about that for a minute. From the eyes of Darwin's evolution, one is merely an evolved animal and does what instinct drives us to do. From the eyes of modern sociologists, we are what we feel. I am what I feel. And so though God made me a certain way, from inside out, if I feel as if I'm a different gender, if I feel as if I am a different race, if I feel as if I am a different species, I can change my identity based on what I feel. I think today's times certainly help us appreciate what Paul is saying in the book of Romans chapter 1 and verse 25, that they exchanged the truth of God for a lie. Well, let me ask you this morning, who are you? Do you have an answer to that question? Who are you? How do you define who you are? What defines your identity? There are some who identify themselves by their possessions, some by their wealth, some by their job, some by their relationships, some by their accomplishments. One of the coaches of the North Carolina basketball teams, Jim Valvano, once his teammates asked him, his players asked him, why is winning so important to you? And he said, because the final score defines you. You lose, ergo you're a loser. You win, ergo you are a winner. And that's how some people see life. I'm simply defined by what I do or my accomplishments or my wealth or the name that I've achieved, maybe through finances or through jobs. I'm defined by the relationships, who I'm dating or who I'm married to. It defines who I am. Well, let me ask the question again. Let's get it clear in our ears. Who are you today? What defines you? Who defines you? Because as the people of God, it ought to be abundantly clear that as we ate and as we drank, our identity is completely wrapped up in the risen Savior, Jesus. As Paul would say, that you have died and your life is hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is our life, is revealed, then you also will be revealed with him in glory. Two phrases which is saying the same thing. Your life is hidden with Christ in God, wrapped up completely in Jesus, in God. And then he says it to make it clear, beginning in verse 4, Christ is your life. So think of that. If Christ identifies, defines who I am, then my purpose and my convictions and my beliefs, my dreams and my plans, my priorities, all of them are shaped and molded and defined by Jesus, by King Jesus. That's who I am. So the question of who you are and what you do and where you identify, it all is wrapped up in Jesus. If you want to know about Jordan, you look to Jesus. Because who it is that I am and what it is that I do and the direction of my life is completely wrapped up. And the one who gave his life for me. But culture today, much like culture then, seeks to rename and redefine us from the inside out. Culture longs for us to define ourselves by our passions, or by our politics, or by our pleasures. And then when we refuse, as God's people, when we stand firm on what it is that we believe, on our convictions in Christ, there's a renaming of the people of God. No longer are we the righteous. No longer are we the holy. No longer are we the people of God. We are religious bigots. We're ill-informed. We're unintelligent. We're holding to ancient myths rather than accepting the progressive and collective mind as a whole. But listen. Culture can slap all sorts of stains upon the name of God and of his people. They can try and redefine what it means to be a Christian in the midst of modern America. But they can't change who we are. Listen to John when he says, see how great a love the Father has bestowed upon us, that we should be called children of God. Listen, and such we are. It is who we are. We are the children of God. Despite the labels, despite the defaming, despite what culture says, this is who we are inside and out. We are the children of God. One of the ways culture tries to change us is by renaming us. The other way culture tries to change us is by taming us, by taming them. Continue in our context, beginning in verse 8. It says, but Daniel made up his mind that he would not defile himself with the king's choice food or with the wine which he drank. So he sought permission from the commander of the officials that he might not defile himself. Now God granted Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the commander and the officials. And the commander of the officials said to Daniel, I'm afraid of my lord the king, who has appointed your food and your drink. For why should he see your faces looking more haggard than the youths who are your own age? Then you would make me forfeit my head to the king. But Daniel in verse 11 said to the overseer, whom the commander of the officials had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, he says, please test your servants for 10 days, and let us be given some vegetables to eat and some water to drink. Then let our appearance be observed in your presence, and in the appearance of the youths who are eating the king's choice food, and deal with your servants according to what you see. Oof. Can you appreciate the hard place Daniel's in? Here's a young man. He's far from home. Very likely mom and dad are not there anymore. And you got to eat. You got to eat something. You can't just not eat. He's in a tough place. And in fact, the prophet Ezekiel pointed to how difficult this would be for God's people. Do you remember that time when God had Ezekiel cook some food in an unsavory way? Said in the book of Ezekiel chapter 4, beginning in verse 12, you shall eat it as a barley cake, having baked it in their sight over human dung. Then the Lord said, thus shall the sons of Israel eat their bread unclean among the nations where I shall banish them. But I said, Lord God, behold, I have never been defiled. For from my youth until now, I've never eaten what died of itself or was torn by beasts, nor has any unclean meat ever entered my mouth. Can you feel the conflict within Ezekiel? I've never done this before. I've never defiled myself. And God is saying this is the conflict that will exist when God's people are taken far from their land. Well, here's Daniel. And now he's got a choice. Immediately it's thrust upon him. Are you going to eat the king's choice food and win favor with the governing leaders of your land? Or are you going to risk all of that and seek the favor and the glory of your God? You know what's amazing, though, is that this whole context began in verse 8. And it doesn't seem like Daniel struggled. It doesn't seem like Daniel had a hard discussion within himself as to what he was going to do. The verse begins with the absolute. Daniel made up his mind that he will not defile himself against the king. He knew. He knew what he was going to do, which tells us this. Even as a young man far from home, even as a young man who grew up in the midst of a wicked nation, because guess what? God punished his people. God destroyed that land. Even that Daniel of that generation knew right from wrong. Even that Daniel knew the law of God. And so even though he's far from home, even though mom and dad are not around, even though it came with great consequences, wrong is still wrong. Daniel made up his mind. And here's the thing. We can't always know what Satan's going to put in front of our path. There are some things we could probably conclude. We can see what he's going to do. We can see where some paths lead. But let's be honest, there's some times in some situations we never saw them coming. Some people we didn't see Satan using in certain ways. Some situations that end up and we weren't ready for those moments. And yet, even though I can't anticipate every single way that Satan's going to try and stop me, that Satan's going to try and harm me and harm my convictions, I can still decide today that whenever those situations arise, however they arise, I will always choose to stand with Jesus. My mind is made up that when those times come, I will choose to honor King Jesus. Because here's the thing, if I don't know today what kind of choice I will make when those arise, when it comes, I'm going to choose the easy path. When it comes, I'm going to choose to do what other people are going to do. When it comes, I'm going to do what doesn't draw attention. Let's just make it clear. If I don't have it in my mind today, that when that crossroads appear and Satan puts that choice in front of me, and I don't know today what choice I will make, guess what? I'm going to make the wrong choice. Odds are I'm going to make the wrong choice. Because that's what Satan loves to do. It's not completely remove our faith, it's taming our faith. The small, subtle steps. He wants us to see the fun, but not the consequences. He wants us to see everyone who is doing it, not all those who have decided not to do it. He wants us to see that what's most important is doing what I want to do, not doing what God expects me to do. It's amazing, I read this week about some statistics about conviction. One author said being convicted driven is doing the right things for the right reasons. Listen to that. Being conviction driven is doing the right things for the right reasons. Right things for the right reasons. Well, there were 62% of people who were polled of this one collection, and it said that this one poll considered them, 62% of those who were asked considered themselves to be deeply religious. Sounds kind of impressive. But the questions went on. 31% make moral decisions based on what feels right. 18% makes moral decisions based on what is best for them. And 14% makes moral decisions based on whatever causes the least conflict with others. You add that up, 63% of people are making moral decisions without the basis of their faith, without God even being involved. They're making decisions based on whatever feels right, whatever brings an easy life, whatever breeds a life free of conflict with those around them. That's how people are living today, and that's what Satan wants. Hear the language of Satan. It's okay to believe in God. It's okay to worship God. Just don't live what you believe. Don't let what you do here affect you. Don't let what happens Sunday affect you Monday to Friday. It's all right for you to own a Bible, just don't live it. It's okay for you to worship Jesus on Sunday, just don't let it change you on Monday. You can be a Christian, just keep your mouth shut. You can believe some things, but don't you dare speak it out in conflict with the culture around you. So you can believe that homosexuality is a sin, that abortion is a sin, that injustices are wrong, but don't speak it, but don't say it. The taming of one's faith. I love one author wrote about conviction. He says, conviction is more than a whim or a guess or an opinion. It's an element deep down in a person's belief system, a part of that very person's principles. And people of strong conviction would rather die than compromise the principles they're convicted of. Hear that again. They would rather die than to compromise the principles they're convicted of. Now listen to the psalmist who says, my heart is set on keeping your decrees, what? To the very end. Right is right, and wrong is wrong, no matter what. No matter if I'm far from home, no matter if I'm surrounded by immoral people, no matter if it comes with terrible consequences, right is right and wrong is wrong, but there's a shift of culture. You can believe certain things, you can practice certain things, just keep it inside and keep it to yourself. It's the taming of one's belief. And then as this culture, as this context ends here in verses 14 to 17, there's the claiming of God's people, beginning in verse 14. So he listened to them, this official of these young men, he listened to them and in this matter and tested them for 10 days. At the end of 10 days, their appearance seemed better, and they were fatter than all the youths who had been eating the king's choice food. So the overseer continued to withhold the choice food and the wine that they were to drink, and he kept giving them vegetables. You know, it's interesting, isn't it? It's just a test, a simple test. Do you eat the king's food or do you eat the food that honors God? You know, the confidence that Daniel and his friends had was not in the food. It's not that they said, that's really bad for you. There's a lot of fats and calories, but I really think the salad and the water is going to be better for you overall. I've really looked it up. I've looked at the nutritional value, and I realized it had nothing to do with it. Okay? Their confidence was not in the healthiness of the food. Their confidence was in the God who commanded them to eat certain foods. Do you realize that? Their confidence that they would win the test is not that this is a lot better than that. It's that our God has chosen this path, and we're choosing to stand with God, realizing he's going to see us through. And he did. But you know it like I do, this is not the only test that Daniel and his friends will go through in this book, because there's a fiery furnace they're going to face. There's a lion's den that will be before them. There's a lot of tests these young men who grow into aged men have to face as they live through a wicked culture. Now, here's the thing. The tests our culture places in front of us is like the line drawn in the sand. What do you believe? Whose side are you on? Where do you stand? Every time here, it seems from this book that Daniel and his friends chose the side of God, and it put them in some immediate dangerous situations. But isn't that the question? When culture says, choose, us or God, assimilation or exaltation. I don't know the word, exiled. God or man, God or culture, the line is drawn in the sand. Now, don't you see that kind of played out in Romans 12? What Paul is saying there when he says in verse 2, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. You know, is it hard to believe that we could not just simply believe in God and exist in peace in our culture? Is that possible? Is it possible to believe and to stand with King Jesus in the midst of our culture and just be at peace? Yeah. For a moment. For a time. But you know it because maybe you've been there. There comes a time, and between the two words highlighted on the text ought to be seen something just like this, where you have to make a choice. You can't choose both. You can't choose the world and God. You can't choose fitting in or being faithful. The crossroads has come, the fork in the road, and I have to choose, will I conform to everything around me in order to find peace, in order to find a camaraderie with my friends, or am I going to choose a path that puts me in direct conflict with the culture I am in? But that's the path, conformed or transformed. Conforming or transforming, like the world or like Christ, but you can't choose both. You can't choose both. What did James say in James 4? Those who choose to be a friend of the world make themselves what? You can't choose both. In other words, to put that in the language of Daniel, you cannot eat the king's food and be pleasing to God. You can't bow down to Nebuchadnezzar's statue and bow down to King Jesus or to your sovereign Lord. You can't stop praying to your king in order to avoid the lion's den and to seek the favor of the one who put those lions into existence. You have to choose. You can't be one or the other. And so the message of Daniel, especially the first chapter as we begin our study this month of looking through the book of Daniel, is this. In the midst of an ever-changing culture, where the laws of men find themselves directly in conflict with the law of God, how is it possible to remain steadfast when everything around you is pushing for you to change? And that is how. We brought this passage up a few weeks ago when we looked at the life of Joseph. It applied to the life of Joseph. It applies to Daniel. Listen to it again, and here's what he's saying. This is what Paul's saying in 1 Corinthians 15:58. Therefore, my beloved brothers, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your labor is not in vain. Now, appreciate what he's saying here. My brothers, be steadfast. Standing firm on what you believe. Do you know what that means? I know what I believe. I know why I believe it. I know God's laws. I know God's expectations. I know it. And so when culture changes, when culture says you need to change your views and to change your stance and to change your message, I know what I believe and I know what I believe it. I'm steadfast. I know the truth. He says you are immovable, which means I am convicted. Which means the choice I made all those years ago when I was baptized and I said, I'm all in with King Jesus. I have given my life to him. I've been baptized. I am committed. I stand firm to that commitment. How many people today do you know are having a hard time standing fast with their commitments? You promised to work for this company 30 years. Well, another one came along. You promised me at the altar, I do until death do us part. Well, someone else came along. We made a promise, brethren, when we were baptized, I'm with you till death do us parts. In fact, I'm with you through death to the end. We made a promise. We're steadfast. We are immovable, which means there's no temptation that can allure us away from God. And when Satan shifts his weapon from allurement to pain, there's no suffering that can cause us to quit, that can cause us to leave. Hear that again, because we'll see it in the book of Daniel. There's no temptation so alluring that I'll walk away from Jesus. And when Satan changes his tune, there is no pain so great that will cause me to quit from walking with Jesus. I made my choice. Like those roots planted deep into the ground, I'm immovable. I'm not going anywhere. So you can tempt and you can push. You can try and you can use this entire nation and its laws and its leaders, but I'm staying with Jesus. And the only direction I'm moving and the only direction we're heading, brethren, is abounding. Onward, upward, forward. Ever and ever more like him. More like him. Do you see? How do you remain steadfast in your faith in the midst of a culture that demands us to change? Well, I do so when I know what I believe. I know who I am. I know whose I am. When I remember the commitment and the promise I made, I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back. And I remember what this blue is about. What's that blue about on your shirts today and on your dresses? Is it simply remembering one who has passed from this life? Or is it reminding ourselves someone's waiting for us and we're heaven bound? We're going there too. We don't remember Clay as someone who has merely died. We remember someone who's gone on to where we're headed. That's what this is about. Steadfast, immovable, abounding. I know who I am. I know whose I am. I know what I have committed to. And I know where I'm going. Can you answer that today? Have you started your journey with Jesus? Have you given your life to him? Have you committed your life to him? In Jesus, there is life, not just eternal to come, but there's life abundant today. A life of peace, a life of purpose, a life that will change you completely in infinite better ways. And if you're here this morning and you've not given your life to Jesus, today would be a great day to do so. To put away your sins, to put him on in baptism, and to start that journey, and we can help you with that. Or maybe if you're here and you found yourself being pushed around by culture's winds, by Satan's traps, and you need some prayers to help you get back on that right path, you come to a good place at a good time. This family here is going to stand with you. We're one. And so if we can help you or pray with you or comfort you, whatever we can do today, if we can help you in any way, right here's where you need to be. Let's do it right now. Let's stand and let's sing.